The kingdom of Velora had always been cloaked in shadows. Even when the sun rose over the jagged mountains, villages nestled in the valleys seemed to shiver under a sky that never fully brightened, as if the land itself were holding its breath. And at the heart of this twilight realm stood the Grand Palace, home to the Alpha King, a man whose power was whispered about in both awe and fear. He ruled with strength unmatched, but also with a coldness that kept even the bravest knights trembling. On one particular morning, the Alpha King rode beyond the palace walls, his black cloak fluttering like a dark banner behind him. His horse's hooves clattered against the cobblestones as the king's sharp eyes scanned the village below. Reports had reached him of dissent, murmurs of rebellion from farmers who dared question his decrees. He had come to assert his authority, to remind them why his word was law. The villagers watched from their doorways, faces pale, children peeking from behind their mothers. They knew stories of his wrath, stories of men who had vanished in the night after angering him. Yet among them, standing apart in the small square, was a young woman whose presence drew the king's gaze more than any rebellion ever could. She was slight, almost fragile-looking, but there was an intensity in her green eyes that seemed to burn brighter than the torches lining the village square. Her hair, the color of chestnut, fell in soft waves around her face, and even in the dim light, her expression was impossible to ignore. Something about her made the Alpha King pause, an unfamiliar sensation stirring in his chest, a curiosity he had not felt in years. "Step forward," he commanded, his voice echoing over the square. The villagers shrank back, but the young woman did not move. She stared at him, unafraid. "I will not," she said softly, yet with a firmness that made his jaw tighten. "I speak only what is true." The king narrowed his eyes. Few dared to speak such words to him without trembling, and fewer still survived it. But her courage, or perhaps her ignorance of fear, intrigued him. "And what is true?" he demanded. "That your rule brings only pain," she said, her voice steady. "You take what is not yours, punish without reason, and the people cry in silence while you sit in your golden hall." A cold wind swept through the square, and for the first time in many years, the Alpha King felt a pang of anger mixed with something he did not recognize. He raised a hand, and for a moment, the villagers feared that the sky itself would darken at his command. Then she did something no one could have expected. She began to cry, not with fear, not with anger, but with sorrow. Her tears fell like tiny crystals, catching the dim sunlight as they rolled down her cheeks, and with them, a strange magic stirred in the air, a power that seemed older than the mountains themselves. The king recoiled as if struck. His vision blurred, and a shadow crept along the edges of his mind. He had heard tales of magic, whispers of curses, but he had never believed them. Not until now. Her tears, innocent and full of despair, had touched something deep within him, something he had hidden even from himself. A sharp pain gripped his chest. He staggered in his saddle, gasping as if the very air had turned to stone. The villagers screamed and scattered, but she remained, trembling, yet unable to move away. She had not intended this, she realized too late. Her grief, pure and raw, had unleashed a curse on the king, the Alpha King himself. The palace mages, summoned at once, murmured in alarm. "It is the tear-born curse," one whispered, eyes wide. "No man can withstand it, save by the hands of the one who shed it." The king, though proud and fierce, felt his strength slipping. Shadows clawed at his mind, twisting memories of triumph into visions of terror. His once commanding voice faltered as he demanded, "Who are you?" I am no one," she stammered, voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "I only weep for what I cannot change." Even as he struggled against the curse, he found he could not punish her. Some part of him, buried beneath years of fear and cruelty, recognized that she held the key to his survival. That realization, mingled with the anger and confusion, unsettled him more than the curse ever could. He forced himself to return to the palace, each step a battle against the darkness inside him. The mages followed, unsure how to contain the power, now entwined with the king's very being. Behind him, the young woman was brought along not as a prisoner, he decided, but as something else entirely. A witness, a healer, perhaps even a guide, through the shadows she had unleashed. In the quiet of the king's private chamber, he studied her. The firelight danced across her tear-streaked face, highlighting the vulnerability that had bewitched him. And yet, she was not weak. There was a determination in her that mirrored his own, a courage that would not bend even before his legendary wrath. "You must leave," he said finally, voice low but firm. "This is no place for a village girl." She shook her head. "I cannot. You are cursed because of me. And if I leave, you will die." The words struck him harder than any blade could. Pride and fear warred inside him. To allow her to stay was to risk more than his life, it was to risk his heart. But to send her away would be to court death. Days passed, and the curse grew stronger. The king, once unstoppable, could barely hold the scepter in his hands without feeling the shadows tug at his soul. Every time he looked at the young woman, he felt the strange pull again, an unspoken connection that terrified him as much as it drew him in. She, for her part, studied him as carefully as he did her. She could feel the immense power trapped within his body, now laced with vulnerability, and a pang of guilt twisted in her chest. She had not meant to curse him, yet now, every tear that fell from her eyes carried the weight of responsibility for his survival. In the silence of the palace night, their fates became intertwined. The Alpha King, fierce and proud, had never needed anyone, and she, small and unassuming, had never wielded such influence. And yet here they were, two souls bound by magic, neither fully understood, standing at the edge of a darkness that threatened to consume them both. And then, just as the moon rose high above the shadowed towers of Velora, the king awoke to find his reflection in the mirror altered. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now glimmered with a faint, eerie light. His face, etched with strength, bore a shadow of something monstrous, a glimpse of the darkness clawing from within. The young woman watched from the doorway, silent and trembling. She did not move, for to step closer might mean unleashing more of her power, more of herself, into the king. And yet, she could not leave him alone. Not when he needed her. Not when her own tears had brought him to this state. For the first time in centuries, the Alpha King did not feel invincible. He felt fear sharp, unrelenting, and entirely new. And he felt something else too. The stirring of a bond neither could name, born of sorrow, magic, and an unspoken need that neither dared to speak. The night stretched on, long and heavy, as shadows whispered in the corners of the chamber. Neither spoke, yet both were acutely aware of the thread connecting them. A fragile, trembling thing that might either save them or unravel them entirely. And as the first light of dawn struggled to pierce the endless twilight of Velora, the king realized with a start that the young woman was the only one who could undo the curse. And yet, the thought terrified him almost as much as it enthralled him. For now, they were bound together by fate, by magic, and by the consequences of a single sorrowful tear. And neither could know what awaited them in the days to come, what shadows would rise, what secrets would emerge, and what sacrifices would be demanded before the Alpha King could reclaim his strength. The kingdom slept uneasily, unaware that its most powerful ruler was now at the mercy of a girl whose tears had changed everything. And somewhere deep in the palace, the shadows whispered of a prophecy long forgotten, hinting that the threads of love, sorrow, and power were about to be tested in ways no one could imagine. The Alpha King stared at the young woman, his heart caught between fear and fascination, as she silently vowed to do whatever it took to save him. And, as the wind howled through the towers, carrying the scent of distant storms, the first chapter of their story came to an end, with both of them unaware that their journey had only just begun. The Alpha King's chambers felt colder than usual. The shadows clung to the corners, deeper and darker than before, as though the curse had begun to reach into every part of his being. The palace walls, once a symbol of his strength, now seemed to close in on him. He could feel the power of the girl's tears pulsing through his veins, a strange warmth mixed with icy dread. He was trapped between fury and fear, pride and helplessness. The young woman had settled in a small room just across the hall. She moved quietly, tending to small tasks, but her eyes never left the king. She could see the way his hands trembled when he held the scepter, the way his jaw tightened as if he were holding back both pain and anger. Her heart ached for him. She had not wished this upon him, yet now it was her responsibility to guide him through it. The court had begun to whisper. Nobles and servants alike noticed the change in their alpha king. Rumors swirled of sickness, of madness, of a curse that no healer could undo. Yet the king, proud and unyielding, would see none of them. He tolerated no interruption to his thoughts, no challenge to his will except for the young woman, whose presence both infuriated and captivated him. "You should not be here," he said one evening, his voice low and rough. He leaned against the windowsill, looking out over the twilight village. "The court is whispering. You will be blamed if this curse grows stronger." She met his gaze steadily. "I cannot leave. It is my tears that cursed you. I must help you survive this." The king's eyes softened, just for a moment. It was a fleeting look that he could neither explain nor understand. "Do you know what it means to be cursed?" he asked quietly. "Do you know what it takes to survive it?" She swallowed hard. "I do not know everything, but I know that it is tied to my sorrow. And perhaps only I can undo it." For a long moment, silence filled the room, heavy with unspoken thoughts. The Alpha King turned away first, pacing the length of the chamber. He had never felt such helplessness, and it made him uneasy, frustrated, and alive in a way he had not expected. The next days were a test of endurance. The curse did not strike suddenly. It crept slowly, gnawing at his strength and twisting his mind. Some mornings he awoke weak, his body trembling, as if the life were being drained from him. Nights were worse. Shadows whispered to him, feeding on his fears and regrets, replaying moments of cruelty he had thought forgotten. The young woman remained by his side, her presence a fragile shield against the darkness. She had begun to understand the ways of the curse. Her tears could calm it for brief moments, but they could also strengthen it if her heart faltered. Every time she cried, the power surged unpredictably, threatening to overwhelm both of them. One afternoon, the king summoned her to the council chamber. He sat on his throne, his usual commanding posture slightly weakened, but still imposing. "I will not hide from the court," he said. "If this curse is to be undone, I must face it openly. You will be with me." The nobles murmured, some with fear, others with thinly veiled contempt. Many had plotted against him, hoping for his downfall. And now the king stood, pale and trembling, yet unbroken in spirit. The young woman's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the struggle between pride and vulnerability. As they walked into the hall, whispers grew louder. Eyes followed them, analyzing, judging. Some nobles believed the girl to be a spy, others a witch, and some thought she might be the key to the king's salvation. The Alpha King ignored them all. His focus was solely on her, and for the first time, he allowed himself to rely on another. Hours passed as they worked together, the girl guiding him through exercises designed to strengthen his mind against the shadows. It was exhausting, physically and emotionally. Yet in those moments, a strange intimacy grew between them, a connection forged, not through words or touch, but through shared struggle and understanding. One evening, the king stumbled in the courtyard, his knees nearly giving way. She caught him without hesitation, supporting him with her small hands. "You must not push yourself too far," she urged, her voice trembling slightly. "The curse feeds on fear and weakness. You cannot face it alone." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a mix of frustration and admiration. "And yet, it seems I cannot face it without you either." His words were soft, almost a whisper, but they carried weight. In that moment, Neither the court nor the kingdom existed, only the two of them, standing in the shadowed courtyard, connected by the magic of her tears and the curse that bound him. The following day, the palace received word of a threat from beyond the mountains. A rival lord had gathered forces, believing the Alpha King to be weak, and prepared to strike. The court erupted in panic, and the young woman realized that the curse was not the only danger. Even if she could heal him, the king's enemies would see opportunity in his vulnerability. She rushed to his side. "You cannot fight them alone," she said. "Even your strength cannot withstand them while the curse grows." He nodded, his pride warring with reality. "Then you will stand with me," he said. "Not as a servant, not as a tool, but as the only one I can trust." The battle, when it came, was sudden and brutal. Shadows seemed to follow the rival forces, and the cursed king's strength faltered under the strain. Yet every time he faltered, the young woman's presence steadied him. Her calm, her determination, her quiet courage became a shield against both the curse and the enemy. As the enemy forces advanced, the king and the girl fought together, not with swords, but with strategy, instinct, and the strange bond that had formed between them. She directed him, warned him of unseen dangers, and lent him her quiet strength. And slowly, he began to regain control, not entirely, but enough to repel the attack. Afterward, as the battlefield fell silent, the king leaned heavily on his sword, breathing hard. His eyes found hers across the field, and for the first time, he felt gratitude, not the distant, formal gratitude he offered to generals or nobles, but deep, personal, human gratitude. "You saved me," he said, voice low and hoarse. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "We saved each other. That is what the curse shows us. Alone, we would fall. Together, perhaps we can survive." The Alpha King did not reply, but he looked at her in a way that spoke of 100 unspoken words. He had always been alone, always feared by the world, and unyielding in his power. But now, standing beside this girl, he realized that strength came not only from fear and might, but from trust, from connection, from letting another share the burden of his soul. That night, in the quiet of the palace, the curse made its presence felt more sharply than ever. Shadows coiled around the king's bedchamber, whispering secrets of his failures, of the darkness that had always lurked inside him. He felt the pull of despair, the gnawing fear that he might lose everything, his kingdom, his power, even his life. The young woman watched from the doorway, her heart tight with worry. She could feel the power thrumming in the air, her tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. She knew that if she cried now, the curse might surge beyond control. Instead, she stepped forward quietly, placing a hand on the king's arm. "You are stronger than it knows," she whispered. "And you are not alone. I am here." The Alpha King's hand found hers, gripping it tightly, a silent acknowledgement of dependence he had never allowed himself before. For a moment, the world fell away, leaving only the two of them and the fragile thread of hope that had formed between them. But even in that fleeting peace, danger loomed. From the shadows, the whisper of prophecy stirred. Ancient and foreboding, the tear-born healer, the cursed king. The bond that will decide the fate of a kingdom. The words echoed faintly, almost too faint to hear, but enough to send a chill through the young woman's heart. She turned to the king, eyes wide. "We are not safe yet," she said. "The curse is stronger, and the forces against you will not rest. We must prepare, for everything is coming." The king, weary yet resolute, nodded. "Then we face it together," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." And as the first light of dawn crept through the towers of Velora, both knew that their journey was far from over. The shadows of the curse stretched before them like a storm cloud, the weight of destiny pressing down, but for the first time, they did not face it alone. In the silence of the palace, the young woman's gaze lingered on the king. Something unspoken passed between them, a bond forged in fear, sorrow, and the strange magic of her tears. It was fragile, uncertain, and dangerous. Yet it was real. The Alpha King, once untouchable, once feared by all, had begun to learn what it meant to need another. And the girl, small and seemingly powerless, had begun to understand the magnitude of the role she would play in the fate of the kingdom. Outside, the winds carried whispers of coming battles, unseen threats, and the growing power of the curse. Inside, the two of them stood together, bound by fate, trust, and the unbreakable thread of a connection that might save or doom them both. And as night fell again over the kingdom of Velora, the girl felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew the curse was far from over, and that the greatest challenges had yet to come. But she also knew that, for the first time, neither of them would face it alone. The Alpha King's chamber was filled with shadows thicker than ever before. The curse had grown stronger, gnawing at his strength and twisting his mind with visions of fear and regret. Even in daylight, he felt the darkness pressing in, turning simple thoughts into labyrinths of doubt. His body ached, his limbs felt heavy, and his heart carried a weight he had never known. The girl, the one whose tears had brought this fate upon him, sat quietly nearby, her gaze fixed on him with a mixture of worry and determination. "You are pushing yourself too hard," she said gently, stepping closer. "The curse will grow if you do not rest." The king looked at her, his eyes dark with frustration. "I cannot rest. There is too much to protect. The kingdom will fall if I show weakness." "You are showing weakness already," she replied softly. "But not because you are weak. Because the curse wants you to believe it. If you do not face it with patience, it will consume you entirely." He paused, staring at the floor, feeling the truth of her words cut deeper than any sword could. He had always relied on strength, on fear, on power to maintain control. Now, none of that mattered. He needed her. He needed her guidance, her calm presence, her tears that could heal as well as harm. Days turned into nights, and the Alpha King's condition worsened. The shadows began to take shapes, whispers became voices, and memories of past actions returned with a cruel clarity. Each vision tormented him, showing the faces of those he had wronged, the cries of villagers punished unjustly, and the lonely years of his reign. The young woman, seeing the torment in his eyes, knew she had to act. She had learned that her tears could soothe the curse, but only if she understood the depth of her own feelings. Her sorrow had caused the curse, yes, but her care, her courage, and her hope could also heal it. And yet, every attempt to help him left her drained, as if the shadows pulled at her as well. One evening, she led the king to the palace garden, a hidden place where sunlight tried to pierce the thick canopy of trees. "You need to see life beyond the darkness," she said. "You need to remember that not everything is shadows and fear. There is still light, still hope, still people who believe in you." The king followed her slowly, each step a battle against the curse. He had never known gardens like this, flowers that bloomed in stubborn defiance, trees that reached toward the sky despite their gnarled roots. For a moment, he felt a flicker of something he had long forgotten. Calm, peace, and vulnerability. "You are different here," he said quietly, his voice rough with fatigue. "The world I know is harsh. This is soft." She smiled faintly, sadness in her eyes. "Softness does not mean weakness. Strength comes in many forms. You have strength in your mind, in your will, and now, in the bond between us. That is something even the curse cannot touch, if we are careful." Their hands brushed accidentally, and the king felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the curse. He pulled back slightly, startled by the unfamiliar warmth of connection. She noticed, and did not withdraw. Instead, she placed a hand gently on his arm. "We face this together," she said. "Not as king and subject, but as two people who must survive this." The Alpha King's heart pounded. He had never let anyone close, never let anyone see the man beneath the armor of power and fear. Yet here he was, relying on a girl whose sorrow had cursed him, trusting her guidance, and feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her presence. But peace was fleeting. Word came that a group of rebels had gathered beyond the northern forests, emboldened by rumors of the king's weakness. They believed the Alpha King could be defeated, that his reign could be ended while he was cursed. The young woman warned him, "You cannot face them alone. Even your strength is not enough." While the curse grows, the king's expression hardened, pride and fear battling within him. "Then we face them together," he said. "You will be with me. Not as a servant, not as a shield, but as the one I trust." When the night came, they rode toward the northern forests under a sky veiled with storm clouds. The wind whipped around them, carrying whispers of the curse, but also the quiet determination of their bond. The rebels awaited them, hidden among the trees, confident that victory was theirs. The battle was brutal. The Alpha King, weakened by the curse, struggled to maintain control. Shadows seemed to rise from the earth, clawing at his mind, whispering doubts that threatened to undo him. But each time he faltered, the young woman's presence steadied him. She guided his steps, warned him of unseen dangers, and lent him strength in moments when he could barely hold a sword. Together, they fought not just with skill, but with trust and understanding. The king began to realize that he had never known true strength until now. Strength was not in ruling alone or striking fear into others. Strength was in relying on another, in allowing someone to share the burden, in facing darkness together. After hours of struggle, the rebels retreated, confused, and beaten by the unexpected coordination between the king and the girl. As silence returned to the forest, the Alpha King sank to his knees, exhausted and drained. The young woman knelt beside him, supporting him as best she could. "You survived," she whispered, "because you did not fight alone." He looked at her, gratitude and admiration mingling with exhaustion. "And I could not have survived without you," he admitted quietly. "You are stronger than I ever imagined." The bond between them deepened, not through words, but through shared struggle, trust, and the unspoken acknowledgement that each had changed because of the other. The curse, though still present, had begun to shift. No longer purely destructive, it now reflected their connection, a reminder that healing required courage, trust, and sacrifice. Back at the palace, the king's chamber felt slightly less oppressive. The shadows had receded somewhat, though the curse's power lingered. He and the girl spent long hours discussing strategies, practicing control over the curse, and learning to read the subtle signs of its influence. One night, the king confided in her quietly. "I have never allowed anyone to see me like this," he said, voice low. "Never let anyone see weakness, fear, or doubt. But with you, I cannot hide. And I do not wish to hide." She looked at him, her heart pounding. "That is the first step," she said softly. "Trust. Only by trusting can we truly fight this curse. And only by accepting that we cannot do it alone can we survive." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of their breathing. Outside, the wind howled through the towers of Velora, carrying whispers of prophecy, danger, and destiny. Both knew that the next challenges would be greater, more perilous, and that the curse still had power enough to destroy everything they had fought to protect. Days later, a messenger arrived with news that set the palace in turmoil. Another kingdom had sent envoys, claiming knowledge of ancient magic that could influence curses. They offered to intervene, but their motives were uncertain. The Alpha King frowned, understanding the danger of outsiders in times of weakness. The young woman, sensing his hesitation, whispered, "We must be careful. Not all who offer help are true allies." The king nodded. "Then we will face it together," he said again, voice firm. "No outsiders, no secrets. Only us." Yet even as they planned their next steps, the shadows in his mind grew stronger. The curse was not defeated, it had only changed. Learning from their attempts to control it, whispers became voices, voices became visions, and visions became dreams of failure and loss. Each night, The young woman stayed by his side, offering guidance, courage, and the fragile magic of her tears. One evening, as the storm raged outside the palace towers, the king suddenly collapsed. The curse had struck with sudden force, sapping his strength and pulling him toward the edge of unconsciousness. The young woman caught him, her hands glowing faintly as her tears mingled with the magic surrounding him. She poured every ounce of her resolve, hope, and care into him, focusing not just on survival, but on awakening his mind to his own inner strength. When he finally stirred, his eyes met hers. In that gaze, they both understood something unspoken. The curse would not be defeated by power or fear alone. It required connection, trust, and love, and if they could not master it together, neither would survive. Outside the palace, the storm began to wane, leaving the world wet and glistening under a pale moon. Inside, the king and the girl sat together, exhausted but determined. The journey ahead was uncertain. Shadows still lingered. Enemies still plotted. The curse still had power. And yet, in that quiet moment, both knew that the bond they shared, born of sorrow, courage, and shared struggle, was their greatest weapon against the darkness. The Alpha King, once feared and alone, had begun to learn the strength of trust and companionship. The young woman, once an unwitting agent of destruction, had begun to understand the depth of her own power and purpose. Together, they would face the storm yet to come. But as the moonlight fell across the palace towers, a new whisper stirred in the shadows, ancient, cold, and patient. The prophecy had only begun. The curse's final test was still ahead, and neither the king nor the girl could know if they were truly ready. The Alpha King's chamber was silent, except for the faint rustle of the wind outside. The curse that had plagued him for so long now pulsed stronger than ever. As if it sensed the end approaching, shadows coiled around the walls and ceiling, whispering accusations, failures, and fear. His body was weak, his mind frayed, yet his determination burned brighter than it had in years. He had learned what it meant to be vulnerable, to rely on another, and now the final test awaited. The young woman stood nearby, her heart pounding in her chest. She had journeyed far to understand her own powers, to learn the full extent of what her tears could do. Nights of research, meditation, and cautious experimentation had prepared her for this moment. Every ounce of her courage and hope was now focused on the man she had once cursed, the man who had become her charge, her companion, and unexpectedly, the one she had come to care for deeply. "You are ready," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But this is not just about you. It is about both of us. The curse cannot be broken by fear or hesitation. You must face it fully, with me by your side." The king nodded, gripping the arms of his chair as the shadows twisted more violently. "I have never known fear like this," he admitted. "And yet, I have never known trust like this either. I will follow you, if you guide me." Together, they stepped into the center of the chamber, where the shadows writhed and twisted, taking shapes that reminded the king of his past cruelties, his lost opportunities, and his years of isolation. The young woman extended her hands, her palms glowing faintly as magic surged from her tears. She had learned to control it, to channel it, to use it not just as a force of sorrow, but as a shield and a light. "Focus on me," she instructed. "See me, trust me, and do not look away from the truth. This curse feeds on fear. Face it, and we can end it." The king's eyes met hers, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then, with a deep breath, he closed his eyes and let the shadows flow around him. The voices of doubt and fear rose in a chorus, but he did not resist. He felt them, acknowledged them, and let them pass through him like water over stone. The young woman's magic flowed into him, warm and steady, countering the darkness with light. She cried softly, tears falling like silver streams, each one carrying her strength, hope, and compassion. The shadows recoiled at the combination of their trust and her magic, hissing and writhing, unable to touch the bond between them. Hours seemed to pass. though time itself was distorted in the chamber. The king's body shook, his muscles burning, yet he held his ground. The young woman's hands glowed brighter, her magic intertwining with his resolve, creating a shield neither the curse nor the shadows could break. And then, a sudden stillness fell. The whispers stopped, the shadows froze, and the room became eerily quiet. The king opened his eyes, and for the first time in months, he saw himself as he truly was, not the feared Alpha King, not the cursed man, but a person capable of change, capable of love, and capable of healing. The young woman smiled faintly, exhaustion evident on her face. "It is over," she whispered. "The curse is broken." He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "No," he said, voice low but firm. "It is not over. Not yet. The curse taught me something. It showed me the darkness inside me, but it also showed me the strength we have together. And now I understand. What I was missing all these years. I am not alone. And I will not let the darkness return. Because I have you." Tears filled her eyes again. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, joy, and recognition. "You are strong," she said, "not just because you have power, but because you have learned to trust, to feel, and to fight together with someone else. That is the true strength." For the first time in his life, the Alpha King laughed softly, a sound that was rough but filled with genuine relief. Shadows that lingered on the edges of the room seemed to retreat, bowing before the bond that had formed between them. The curse, ancient and relentless, had been undone not by power alone, but by courage, trust, and the unspoken connection that had grown between them. The court, once fearful of his weakness, began to see a change in the Alpha King. He walked among his people with a new presence, not the cold, unapproachable ruler, but a leader who had faced his own darkness and emerged stronger. The young woman remained at his side, no longer merely a healer or guide, but a partner in the truest sense. Days passed, and the Alpha King slowly regained his strength. The shadows no longer whispered in his ears. Instead, they lingered at the edges of the palace as reminders of lessons learned. He trained, not for war or conquest, but to maintain balance and wisdom. The young woman guided him in understanding the depth of his own emotions, teaching him patience, compassion, and the value of connection. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged mountains, painting the sky in deep hues of crimson and gold, the Alpha King and the young woman stood together on the balcony of the palace. The wind carried the scent of flowers from the garden below, mingling with the distant murmur of the village. "You saved me," he said softly, turning to her. "And in doing so, you saved more than just my life. You saved me from the man I would have become if the curse had won." She smiled, her green eyes shining in the fading light. "We saved each other. That is the way of it. Strength alone cannot overcome darkness. Trust, hope, and courage, they are what truly matter." The king took her hand in his, holding it firmly but gently. "I have never felt this way before," he admitted. "Fear, yes. Pride, yes. But never care, hope, or trust like this. You have given me more than life. You have given me myself." Her heart swelled, and for a moment, all the hardships, battles, and tears seemed to fade. "And you have given me purpose," she said quietly. "You have shown me that even the smallest of us can change the course of destiny, and that love and trust can overcome even the darkest curses." The moon rose over the palace, casting silver light across their faces. Shadows lingered in the corners, but they no longer threatened. The Alpha King and the young woman stood together, united not just by circumstance, but by choice, by courage, and by the deep understanding that had grown between them. Yet the world beyond the palace was still unpredictable. Whispers of the curse's origin, of ancient magic, and of rival kingdoms' ambitions floated on the wind. They knew challenges would come again, that darkness never fully disappeared. But for now, they had triumphed. And the knowledge that they faced the future together made them stronger than any curse, any army, or any shadow could be. The young woman leaned slightly against the king, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. The warmth between them was quiet, steady, and real. No words were needed. In their silence, they found understanding, comfort, and the strength to continue. And as dawn broke over Velora, spilling golden light across the kingdom, a new chapter began. The Alpha King was no longer defined by fear or power alone. He was a man who had faced darkness and learned the value of connection, of vulnerability, and of love. The young woman, once a witness to sorrow, had become the healer of a king's heart, a companion, and a force of hope in a land that had long known only shadows. The palace, once a place of fear and isolation, now echoed with the quiet promise of a future shaped not by magic alone, but by the courage of two souls bound by trust. The curse was gone, but its lessons remained etched into the king's heart and the young woman's soul. Together, they would face whatever came, not as ruler and subject, but as equals, as partners, and as two people who had discovered the strength of true connection. The wind whispered softly through the towers, carrying a promise. That even in darkness, light could grow. That even in sorrow, hope could thrive, and that even the deepest curses could be undone by trust, courage, and love. And so, the Alpha King and the young woman watched the sun rise over Velora, hand in hand, ready to face the future together. Knowing that the greatest strength was not in power or fear, but in the bond that had grown between them.